So, good morning. This week, our focus is on ways that schools could, and the evidence shows that they would, better support and promote the well being of gender diverse and sexually diverse teenagers in our school systems. So, this study actually focuses on Australia, and Australia is an interesting country. It has a lot of similarities to the United States, so we see parallels and really important sort of insights that come out of the research done in Australia. So, in Australia, a lot like America, gender diversity content isn't really talked about in their classrooms. And a lot of that is related to the fact that there's terrible media discourse around gender diversity and sexual diversity and conversations about it. There is a coalition called Safe Schools Australia, and they have positioned or defined lesson content that was designed to promote affirmation and inclusivity of gender diverse students as being really radical and over the edge and too far and not appropriate. And, if you look at American news cycles, you'll see that there's a lot of groups that would say that any kind of conversation about gender diversity and transgender youth is inappropriate and is grooming American youth. So the parallels are there. I think whatever we find in this study can be very, very applicable to the United States. Now, in Australia, what's interesting about the fact that this Safe Schools Coalition has defined their content as radical is that that content in Australia is really nowhere near what it should be in terms of creating a safe and visible inclusivity in their schools. So it's not even close to what it should be, and yet it's viewed as radical. And as a result of this, teachers in Australia are really concerned about whether they even should include content on gender and sexual diversity, and if they do include it, when and how to include it, because there's a lot of pushback from certain voices and certain factions in Australia. So teachers are scared, teachers are unsure, and then, as no surprise, school experiences for our sexual and gender diverse students have gotten actually much worse in Australia. And so they're seeing really high rates of bullying and harassment. It's going up. Bullying is actually worse for gender diverse LGB than it is for cisgendered LGB. So you have the stereotype and the stigma of being LGB, but you're also gender diverse, which adds to it, and the bullying is even worse. So these youth are experiencing social isolation, marginalization, not only by their own peers, but by staff and faculty at schools, which is to say then that we see a much more hostile school climate in places like Australia and the United States. And that results in a lowered sense of school belonging, less connection to school, lowered educational outcomes or poor educational outcomes. There's a lot of safety fears. There's high rates of absenteeism. Kids have difficulty concentrating at school. They have lower or poor academic self-concepts, and they have lower achievement. Now, we are seeing strong parallels to this, and in fact, in the United States, we've taken it even farther. So there isn't just people calling the curriculum radical in the United States. Multiple states have banned that kind of curriculum. Florida has a Don't Say Gay bill, which is the anti-woke bill, but you can't talk about gender diversity. You can't talk about sexual diversity. A lot of states have banned any kind of a book that addresses content about sexuality or gender. And you can see here, there are certain states that have close to 1,000 bans. Texas, Florida's right behind it with 500 to 750 bans. You can see that we are beginning to ban books. We're beginning to ban content and curriculum that is based on gender and identity. So schools have become more hostile places for students. So our previous research is pretty clear that for gender and sexually diverse youth, there are ways that schools can make the place seem and be perceived as safer and more supportive. And so one of them is is having supportive peer groups, having inclusive curriculum, and having a really obvious and out there and very active gay-straight alliance. And when you have that, you see students who are gender and sexually diverse reporting a greater sense of safety, they have less fear, and they actually report less bias-based victimization. But, honestly, being safe at school and not being victimized is pretty much the bare minimum of what we expect for our students who are sexually and gender diverse. So if we want them to actually have well-being, the research suggests that a hugely important component of that is a positive emotional support experience from their teachers. And the impact of this perceived teacher emotional support, which also includes empathy and a connection to the student, is that when students feel like the school staff and the faculty are invested in their well-being and they care about their academic outcomes, then students feel a stronger sense of connection to school, they have more motivation to learn, and they do better in school ultimately. So if we want to do better than just feeling safe and we want to promote well-being, then they need to experience positive emotional support from their teachers. They also need the presence of what we call safe adults. So, safe adults are school staff members that the students feel like they might discuss their sexuality or their gender diversity, and that promotes a sense of belonging, greater work productivity, learning, higher levels of educational aspiration when they feel like there are people that they can talk to and share their thoughts and feelings and fears and hopes and dreams with, and that they'll be supported without judgment. So when you combine these, the perceptions of teacher emotional support combined with the presence of safe adults, you find that even in schools where there's really high levels of reported victimization for kids who are same-sex attracted, students have this sense of connection to the school, and they have better academic outcomes and greater well-being. So these are things that we could be doing to better support our youth in schools. All right, so they take a very interesting theoretical framework. And this is the idea of a school gender climate. So overall, the idea is that schools participate as this kind of really active sociocultural agent. And it can and does frequently marginalize sexually and gender diverse youth. It sends them into, it says, you don't fit in, you don't match what we expect. So you go over here in the corner. And schools are actually really one of the strongest places where we see this, quote, production of gendered and sexualized identities. So here, peer culture, formal and informal curriculum, pedagogical practices all suggest what is, quote, normative and what is abnormal or different or weird or not acceptable. And so you have this marginalization. And so for many children and even young adults, because you can't or won't perform your gender identity correctly, that is what society says you should be doing and how you should appear and how you should act, then you end up with this social stigma and victimization and often failure to live up to expected gender ways of being, expected sexual ways of being, is often, and it's punished with these social conventions that send you off into dress code violations or school suspensions or being banned from the prom or being kicked out of the bathroom that matches your identity and pushed into unsafe places or pushed out of the mainstream. So we regulate what is acceptable and what is not. So the idea of a gender climate, it covers the official, so organizationally enforced, like dress codes and rules about who can use what bathroom, and also unofficial or socially enforced policing of students' physical appearance, and it's dependent on their assumed biological sex. So your appearance has to match what you are, what your supposed or alleged biological sex is. We have this hidden curriculum of gendered areas of study. Both the academic and social rewards and punishments are linked to students' gender expression. And this is really sort of the basic source of school-based marginalization of these gender and sexually diverse youth. And it's the ultimate source of school-based homophobia, school-based transphobia, where you have to align with what's expected or you are pushed out and you are frightening because you are different. Just to the picture on the side, the Keep Locker Rooms Safe, just recently, Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders signed a law that now prohibits transgender people at public schools from using the restroom that matches their gender identity. And this is an exact example of a school gender climate, one that is transphobic, homophobic, marginalizing anyone who doesn't conform to societal expectations for what is normative and what is not. Okay, so this study is, again, set in Australia, but again, it can apply to the United States very, very easily. And their goal is to determine how school climate impacts gender diverse students' well-being. So they had 704 responses on the Free to Be national survey. They recruited them through Facebook and other social media apps. They specifically targeted LGBTQ2 plus youth. They looked at adolescents, so ages 14 to 18. As you can see, 7% were gender diverse, 61% were attracted to both genders, 41% were pansexual. And in their questionnaire, they asked about students' accounts of their teachers and their classmates' treatment of their sexual and gender diversity. And so they were particularly looking at the curriculum, the social mores, the social norms, how inclusive was the curriculum and the social norms, or how marginalizing were they. And then, as outcomes, all the participants were asked to report on their sense of school well-being, their sense of connection to school, their sense of safety, and then their grades, academic grades in reading and science and math and those sorts of things. So we talked about teacher positivity, teacher emotional support. I wanted to give you just a quick peek at how they actually measured this. So the 3 questions, it's literally a very short question set, is my teachers say it's okay for people to express their gender in different ways. In my school, if someone made fun of me about the way I express my gender, the teachers would defend me. And in my school, teachers talk about same-sex attraction in a positive way. And I want you to pause for a minute, and I want you to think back to your high school classes and your teachers, and answer that question. You don't have to pick on a specific teacher, but answer those questions in general. Did your teachers say it was okay to be gender diverse? Did your teachers stand up for and intervene and defend people who were gender diverse? And did your teachers talk about non-heterosexual relationships in a positive and supportive way? That's really important for not only LGBTQ plus students, but also for cisgendered and heterosexual youth, because it sends a message about what is okay and what is not okay. And it sends a message about how much you have to conform to norms. And it sets up expectations about who is included and who is excluded. So it matters beyond just the LGBTQ2 plus group, but obviously that is the most likely to be impacted by these. So think a little bit about your own high school experiences. Okay, so I mean, these are not really, hopeful results. They are quite depressing, but they do tell us where we need to go and how we need to train teachers. So it turns out that gender diverse students were much more likely to report hearing transphobic comments, and they were much less likely to report that their teachers were clearly, openly, and visibly positive about transgender, genderqueer, or gender atypicality. So that is when you compare them to same-sex attracted cisgendered students. So that is compared to their lesbian, gay, bisexual counterparts, but who identified as their gender identity is the same as their biological sex. Compared to them, these gender diverse students are much more likely to hear these negative comments and to not see support for their gender identities and for their lived experiences. So transphobic comments could be subtle to all the way to fully transphobic, but things like negative phrases or terms to describe people who are genderqueer, who are gender ambiguous, or who identify as transgender. And some of the youth used examples such as calling someone it, or forcing someone to define or demonstrate their biological sex, or using the wrong pronouns, or using dead names, those sorts of transphobic comments. So then probably the most important finding is that students' sense of school safety and teacher positivity strongly predicted school connection, with genderqueer, transgender, or gender atypical youth reporting less school safety and less teacher positivity. So they were then less likely to experience school connection. They're cisgendered but opposite or same-sex attracted peers, and their cisgendered straight or same or opposite sex attracted peers had much higher perceptions of school safety and were much more likely to report teacher positivity and about their gender and about their identity. So we can see there's a clear reason why youth are not experiencing a safe and inclusive environment, and that's because they don't perceive teacher positivity. And as a result, they don't feel safe, and as a result, they don't feel connected to their school. Okay, so this lack of teacher support, this lack of teacher positivity, can result in gender diverse youth ending up being invisible in the classroom. People don't see them, people don't recognize them, people don't support their identity. Obviously, that can be very, very distressing. It could lead to shame, embarrassment, depression, anxiety. It's very upsetting. It can kind of gnaw at you and make you not want to go to school. So it's going to increase school absenteeism. It's going to increase cutting classes, and low school connection. If you don't feel like people see you or understand you or support your identity, you don't feel like you belong. And that, of course, will then tear away at and destroy academic outcomes and social outcomes and positive outcomes for youth. So we really do have to work on training our staff and our faculty so that they have knowledge about transgender youth, about genderqueer youth, about gender atypical youth. The teachers have to be supported in supporting the diversity of their students. So the administration, the school boards, the PTA have to be on board with providing support and a positive, inclusive environment. And the teachers themselves have to have the knowledge and the training and the support so that they can normalize gender diversity, so that they can make it such that their classrooms say, hey, there's a lot of ways to express gender. There's a lot of ways to express sexuality, and there is no right or wrong, that you can be who you are, and it's okay in this classroom. Now, I recognize that that is hard for many people with strong religious beliefs, but particularly in American classrooms, we do separate church and state. And so in our classrooms, we need to be able to openly support youth's identity and make the classroom a place where all kids feel supported and where all kids want to be in that particular classroom. Now, I did want to open up and look at some examples of gender inclusive schools. So there are schools that are moving towards gender neutral bathrooms. The whichever is a cool way to do it. And you can see it's combined the male and female signs, and just it's open. Use it how you want to. There's a movement in Texas. I love this. Y'all means all. And with that, President Biden has moved to protect transgender athletes who have been banned from sports in Texas, and is moving to reinstate their constitutional rights to participate and to be a part of the school system. And then in Japan, a lot of Japanese high schools are relaxing or getting rid of their gender codes for uniforms altogether, so that transgender youth have the options to wear clothing that reflects their own gender identity. And to win broad acceptance, they're simply pitching these changes as ways that students will benefit overall because they have more flexibility and they can be more comfortable, and it's more convenient to be able to wear what you are most comfortable in. So these are some uplifting, hopeful kind of examples of how schools are beginning to try to make the place more inclusive and more supportive of gender diverse youth.